The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, this is the Florida League of Cities and welcome to today's webcast. It's the first module in the Florida Regional Compact Initiative e-learning series, and today is about the art of consensus. A couple of housekeeping things that I want to share with everyone. On your kind of navigation panel off to the right hand of your screen, which is where it normally shows up, there's a little section that says handouts. You can download a copy of today's presentation. It's a PDF version that has 2 slides per page. Download it, print it out, feel free to follow along as today's 2 speakers go through their slides. Right below that, or somewhere in that navigation panel, is an opportunity to ask questions. Feel free to submit those questions as we go, and then we will read those questions off at the conclusion of today's presentation and answer them then. There's also a chat function. If you have some questions or you just want to give feedback as we go along, feel free to use that chat function as you wish. One of the common questions that we get are, will this webinar be posted somewhere after the fact? And the answer is yes. It will actually be posted in 2 separate places on the Florida League of Cities website. The first location is under FLC University Webinars Archive. There'll be a link directly there, as well as on our Florida Regional Compact Initiative page. All of our webinars, including our Intro to Compacts from last fall, will be posted there. It will also have the PowerPoint as well as the full audio and visual show that is about to broadcast. That said, you are being recorded, including the questions that you ask. It is being recorded and will be shared to the larger population. Okay, with that, welcome to the first module, the art of consensus. We have 2 speakers here with us today. Representative Kristen Jacobs. She is a member of the Florida House of Representatives serving District 96 down in Broward County. Prior to her service in the legislature, she served on the Broward County Commission for 16 years. And she joins us today because of the integral role that she played in bringing the Southeast Florida Climate Compact to life. That particular compact is what serves as inspiration to our President Matthew Ceruncy's initiative for this year, in which this e-learning series is a product of. Following Representative Jacobs, we will hear from Rafael Montalvo from the Florida Consensus Center, and we will introduce him a little later on in the broadcast. With that, I would like to turn it over to Representative Jacobs. Thank you.
Thank you, Holly, and thanks for that nice introduction. If you can move on to the next slide. What I want to share with you all today is, forgive me if it sounds sort of like a duh sort of conversation, but it's really about getting items on your agenda and passing them 101. The very first step is that you should know your material, know it well. You should, when you post an agenda item, make sure that you understand how to not just your debate points on an item, but what would the other side say? If you can debate your item on the pro and the con, then you're moving in the direction that helps you understand what kinds of things may be thrown at you on the fly. So when you put an agenda item together, make sure that you know what exactly you're doing, what you expect, all of the information that's necessary for others to be able to understand what it is that you would like to pass before your board and your colleagues. The other key part of that, of course, is making sure that your staff knows what it is that you want to do. Have meetings with them, make sure that you've had conversations and that you've walked them through the agenda item itself, how far you wish it to go, where its limitations are, and make sure that they understand that as well, and listen to with that other ear and ensure that you know what their objections are if they are present at all, and try to tease that out and work through them so that you don't have a surprise when your item is introduced to the rest of your colleagues. And then, of course, speaking of your colleagues, it's super helpful if you understand what drives them. Understanding what your colleagues, how they think and how they arrive to that seat, and the other political winds that are blowing around each of us that serves in a political process really will help your item move forward. It's not enough just to be right. It's really important to understand what your colleagues think is right and understanding their point of view and in many cases what their hot buttons are, understanding what you can say to help move your items along. And in moving your items along, one of those is to make sure that when you bring your item to the day that your colleagues are going to see it on the agenda, that you've put champions in your audience, those folks that will come up to the microphone and speak to the agenda item at hand, but not just those people who are going to come up and say, oh, aren't you wonderful, we agree that you brought this item up and this is fantastic, but rather those that will look across the board themselves and congratulate the board for having brought an item that is this forward thinking for their consideration. And so talking to your champions before, talking about their behavior, making sure that they don't go in and cancel out some of the positive vibes you may have just set the stage for is a really important part of the process. And then speaking of the stage, sharing that stage, most likely you're not going to be the only one that supported this item, but because of the state sunshine laws, you're going to be limited in what, if anything, you can say to your colleagues about the item, and limited in understanding their knowledge of the item. And so those that come to in essence, the stage, the day that this item is being discussed, making sure that your colleagues' opinion is one, if it's one that you share, that you are, I guess, readily available and easy in allowing them to take the limelight, because it isn't all about you. It's about the item. It's about the item making it forward, not just across your desk, but enduring as the years go by. And of course that means always that you're going to have to be a little gracious. And in fact, not a little. I think it's the driving words. I think the very words that our mothers grew us up with, that you can catch more flies with honey than you can with vinegar. And being gracious, even when some folks are not maybe as educated on the item, perhaps they didn't even read their backup before they showed up on the dais that day. We're all familiar with instances that happen like that, so be prepared for it. Be gracious when it happens. Next slide, please, Holly.
It should be coming. There you go.
There we go. A little bit of delay, but you know, we're all getting to do this remotely, so this is just awesome. So when you have an item that's coming forward, it's really important that you've thought about how it was written before it gets to them, because in many cases that's the first thing that some of your colleagues are going to read, or the first information that's shared with them. So you want to make sure that the item explains explicitly what is happening not only for your colleagues, but that your staff understands. What is this work going to look like for the staff? Are they going to be working behind your back and with their colleagues when they go to speak to your colleagues? You know, there's a whole way that they can sabotage an item without you even being aware of it. So that's why that first step of having a conversation with your staff is so important. Equally important is to respect their time and their knowledge of the issue that you're bringing forth, making sure that they understand what the next steps are, that it's clear, and that they know what is going to be their first step, their next step, and following steps. That is really an important thing for you to communicate. When you craft the agenda item, make sure that it too is very clear. Spelling things out with bullets and making sure you're presenting facts in an easy-to-read way, understanding that you may have colleagues, you may have a whole lot of attachments and backup material that you could just snow under your colleagues with. Refrain from doing that if you can, and try to keep the facts clear and concise so that they understand what it is that you're bringing forward. And also, equally important, in fact, on the end of every one of our agenda items for the compact that I led was a tagline that was consistent across each one that said, there is no fiscal impact associated with this agenda item. However, if there ever becomes one, if we're ever going to need dime one in order to move this process forward, this item stops dead in its tracks until it comes back before the board for them to understand what that impact is, and they approve it before it moves forward. So their approval is contingent upon, or its forward progression is contingent upon their approval. And then also, as you're working with your staff, make sure that you understand which of the staff members is going to lead an internal work group, because that is the next step of a compact process, is that you're turning a lot of this over to your staff. It may be that you have staff that is new in this process and there is outside staff, for example, academia, that's going to be assisting them with this process, make sure that they understand they're not being handed some big hairy thing that they can't deal with, but that there's going to be support. And make sure they understand that. So again, you don't want the item coming up during discussion and you have a staff member looking quite perplexed at what's being proposed. Next slide. So you know, it's an interesting thing when we put an agenda item out and we win, right? We can win by majority vote or we can win by unanimous vote. As most of you know, when you win by a majority vote, that means that there's quite a few out there that didn't agree with you, and they, generally speaking, will live to see themselves proved right, and that you are proved wrong, which means that while you may win this battle today, ultimately it's not going to endure over the years and certainly may not endure after you leave the dais unless you have that unanimous vote. So working your way through a unanimous vote requires kind of a different approach. It means that you're going to have to really understand the internal motivations of your colleagues. You want to listen with a really tight ear to what their objections are if they have them, and make sure that they understand what this agenda item is committing them to do. That especially when you're talking about compacts, you are working with others. You're going to be working in ways that you probably are not familiar with, nor is your staff, directed by the board to work collaboratively, to share your assets and try to understand how other jurisdictions behave, and creating these relationships across these broad and in many cases gaps, where we have cities that have just simply not worked together in the past, and everybody's working at a different level. So understanding what your colleagues are going to think about all of this and helping them understand that really at the end of the day, this is good business. This is good business not just for your own community and its economy, but for that of the next one, that your resources are now going to be stretched because you're linking your processes and your destiny, in essence, in this one narrow scope to that of another community. Next slide. So on adoption day, you've brought your champions, you've talked to them about what they're going to be saying and not saying, what their behavior should look like, and how they're going to share that limelight with those colleagues who also agree, and those that don't agree, that they won't attack them, they won't denigrate them in any way. You want to make sure your champions behave, basically. Sharing the stage, again, making sure it isn't all about you and your perfect idea, but rather it's all about we. It's about helping the group move together, because ultimately your group is going to be working with the next group over and the next one, i.e. the various cities, and there are political winds that blow across all jurisdictions. So helping your colleagues stay tight and share the stage with them means that your city is going to be able to hang through all the changes that are coming as you start to work with other cities and counties and the other stakeholders involved in the issue that you're tackling. And above all, to be gracious, be flexible, open to your colleagues' suggestions and those of stakeholders in the community, to understand that your agenda item may have been absolutely perfect when you put it together, but not everyone's quite going to think of it that way. And so that as it comes before them, allow for that time for them to make the changes that they do, be open to those suggestions, and try to be flexible. And with that, I'm going to hand the stage, I guess, as it were, over to the next presenter, Rafael Montalvo.
Thanks, Representative Jacobs. As you all signed up for this e-learning series, one of the things that we talked about is the importance of the work before presenting an agenda item, and then comes the really heavy lift of achieving that unanimous vote during the presentation of that agenda item. And with that, we have brought on the expertise and skills of Rafael Montalvo to kind of guide us through that kind of art of how you build that consensus. He is an independent practitioner with the Florida Consensus Center. He's a former associate director there, and he is nationally and internationally respected for his facilitation and training skills in a variety of settings. He's mediated numerous large and small scale processes to build consensus around several controversial public policy issues, and is well respected in the training arena. of interest, I think, to cities is that he has his background as a land use planner, and that has served as a true asset for many of his cases. As Representative Jacobs mentioned, we are all kind of joining you remotely, so from all of our individual homes, or as it were cars, welcome, and I want to turn the stage over now to Rafael Montalvo.
Thank you, Holly. Thank you for that embarrassingly flattering introduction. I suspect my former office wrote. A couple of words about the perspective I bring to this first. As Holly mentioned, I was for many years Associate Director of the Consensus Center. The Consensus Center is an entity created by the Florida legislature to help parties collaborate around public policy issues in Florida. Sometimes that help is in the form of mediation, as Holly alluded to. More often it's in the shape of helping groups, be they boards, civic groups, leadership groups, others, reach consensus on a policy or a direction. The Consensus Center does that from sort of a public interest perspective, not on behalf of any of the parties involved. And in my 25 years with them, that was the perspective that imbued my work and that sort of imbues these comments. So that's where I'm coming from. A couple of overarching comments about the points I'll touch on. We've talked a little bit about the fact that this program is called the Art of Consensus, and that as a practical matter on elected boards that should ideally mean a unanimous vote. It does not have to mean that everyone has the same level of enthusiasm for an item. What you are hoping to get to is a position where ideally, of course, everyone supports the item wholeheartedly. But more likely, in many situations, you're going to get to a place where some, perhaps many of your colleagues support an item wholeheartedly. Others think it's a good idea, might not be what they would do, and others are just sort of barely in there, agreeing to let it go forward, perhaps agreeing not to oppose it, but unsure of their position otherwise. Any of those is consensus. Any of those will get you a unanimous vote. I mention that now because we tend to push for everyone to feel the same way about an item that we do. What you really need is a functional consensus allowing the item to go forward with ideally everyone's support, but at least everyone's acquiescence. There's no magic bullet for doing this, and especially there is no magic bullet for doing this on the day of presentation. The closest thing to a magic bullet is repetition and iteration. For the vast majority of people, it takes time to understand particularly a complex issue, to become comfortable with the issue, and then to become comfortable with what's being proposed. So the more opportunities you have to bring the item to your colleagues for discussion and refinement before they have to make a decision, the likelier you are to approach consensus. So workshops, preliminary discussions, there are a whole host of ways to approach that. We'll talk a little bit about process in a moment. But do think of this as a process. I believe Representative Jacobs will tell you a little bit in a few minutes about the Southeast Florida Climate Change Compact. It took 8 years. Not everything takes 8 years, but be prepared for work on the issue over time. The last thing I'll say before launching into the main points is that it's helpful to think of consensus building as not just an effort to persuade, but as a negotiation. Representative Jacobs alluded to the importance of understanding the motivations of your colleagues on the board, the constituencies they represent, the groups that are involved on the issue. All of that leads to a back and forth is a negotiation in some ways. How can the item be shaped in a way that allows everyone to support it? And that shaping takes place over time and over multiple engagements with the issue and the topic. So with that in mind, and consider, considering the limited amount of time we have today, I thought it would be helpful to cover 3 sets of ideas. The first is some basic concepts. These are concepts from the field of negotiation, really, but I think they very much apply here. A couple of ways to think about that process that I just mentioned of building support and engaging people over time with the topic and what you would like to happen on the topic. And then some very specific tools that you can use on the day of, but also in every conversation or in every discussion of the topic over time as you are building consensus and agreement. So the 4 basic concepts that I want to touch on that inform that process and that that the tools will cover work with are issues, positions, interests, and values. Let's go to the next slide. Fundamentally, an issue is just something that you are going to need to talk about. It's a topic to be addressed by participants in a discussion or a problem-solving process. And so taking as an ostensibly hypothetical example, the siting of a wastewater treatment plant, one of the issues associated with that proposal or that siting might be the effects, if any, of discharges to the local rivers. There are regulations governing that. People still have concerns about that. So the issue is a topic to be addressed. Next. An interest is an underlying need or concern that's important to a satisfactory outcome for a given party on that issue. This goes back again to understanding the motivations of your colleagues, and not just your colleagues, but their constituencies and the groups that are involved in the issue. The example here is that citing the wastewater treatment, in the siting of a wastewater treatment facility, one interest of a recreational fishing group or recreational fishing industry representatives might be the effects, if any, back up, might be related to the effects of the discharges. The issue might be to maintain the health of fish stocks in the river. One issue, one interest. That same interest might be shared by a number of different groups. Other groups may have other interests related to the plant and related to other issues that the plant raises. The key here is that this is what a party needs, and if you're going to get them on board, if you're going to get their support for the proposal, you need to understand what they need and how the proposal addresses that need. It won't address every interest equally, but explicitly thinking about the underlying interests and how what you are proposing affects those is one of the fundamental starting points for a conversation about the issue. So next. A position is one way to meet an interest, but it's only one way. In the example here, the recreational fishing group may be opposed to the siting of the plant where it's proposed, and that position may address their interest in protecting the health of the fish stocks, but it's very, very probably not the only way to address that issue. There may be a whole range of other possible actions or variables that affect that issue, that affect the health of the fish stocks, and as you move the item forward and begin to engage with that group as well as others, you would, if you had not already, begin to refine the item in ways that make it clear how it affects that interest, how it protects the fish populations, etc. So it's worth, that may be a very self-evident distinction between interests and positions, but it's worth mentioning because all too often when we're trying to persuade others of something we think is right and good, we focus on what they've said their position is. It's really important to acknowledge that position, but to try and focus your discussion on the interests and the needs behind it, rather than on the position itself. And again, on how the proposal affects those interests and needs, and meets them ideally. Next. Not a lot to add on this. values or beliefs about what is more or less important, about what is right or wrong. They're tricky to work with in public policy contexts. Be aware of them, particularly if they are strongly held by others in your discussion. Be aware of making clear your own. People will often have, there will often be a close tie between what people think is important and what they see as their interests. So, excuse me, again, being aware of these in the discussion as you go forward. Next. Okay, this is a schematic that's helpful for thinking about what you need to do to build a consensus on an issue and where you may be in that process at any given time. At the far left of the image, and this, by the way, is from a book that I would strongly recommend to anyone trying to build consensus around an issue, which is The Facilitator's Guide to Participatory Decision Making by Sam Kainer. The site is at the bottom. The notion here is that everyone comes into a discussion with their understanding of the problem and very often with their notion of what should be done about it. And at the very beginning of the process, everybody has probably at least a slightly different notion of what should be done about it and what the problem is. In this first stage, as you see the lines diverge, what you're doing is helping inform everyone involved in the discussion, yourself as well as others, of the full range of interests, the full range of values, and as you go through this, the range of options for meeting those interests that are out there. And the way, we'll talk a little bit about how you do that in a moment, but it's fairly straightforward. You listen to what they're saying, you listen for their interest, you try and express your own, you try and express what, why you think the item is good, and you learn from each other in that portion of the discussion. And again, this may not be on the day the item is presented. This may have been 6 months before, when staff was first told to study the possibility, or it was first raised by a citizen, or wherever the process starts. It does not start on the day the item comes before the board. However, the discussion you have at the board, either on the day of adoption or in earlier workshops, whatever the case may be, can strongly contribute to building the shared understanding of interest, the shared understanding of values and options that'll let you work towards a version of it that everyone can accept. The center part of this this graphic is probably self-explanatory, but it's not enough to tell each other about all of those interests and values and positions and your differing evaluations of the issue and the proposal. You have to put all that together, and if you're the champion for that issue, putting all that together is going to require your leadership. But it'll also require an effort on the part of others. So the more you can do to make it easy for them to come on board by understanding their interests and refining the item in ways that address those interests, the better it'll be. And it'll still be painful in most cases. If you're lucky enough to have a board that agrees with you 90% from the beginning, then the groaning involved here will be relatively minor. But very often that groaning goes on for years as you keep the item front and center while, I shouldn't say very often it goes on for years. It sometimes goes on for years, but it does very often go on for many meetings over months, simply because as elected officials you're dealing with complex issues and issues and proposals that affect a great many groups and constituencies, and they all have an interest in the outcome. And so it takes some effort to put all that together into a package that's acceptable to everybody. Once you start doing that, you can continue the process of refinement until you reach a decision. But do keep in mind, it is always a process, and it very rarely happens all in one meeting. You're at least talking several meetings from start to finish, and sometimes more than that, depending on what's involved. Next. I think I've said this about 4 different ways by now, but multiple engagements over a period of time are helpful. That's all that this says. So next. it may be clear from the way I've described the process, but that kind of give and take and just that allows for questioning and tentative exploration of different ideas and suggestions for refinement that may or may not be taken up ultimately is for some boards difficult to do under regular discussion in Robert's Rules of Order. There's always a possibility that somebody gets frustrated and makes a motion to do something or other prematurely, or people don't realize, perhaps your colleagues don't realize, that this is an issue that really does require their attentive engagement. Whatever the case might be, if your board is one that doesn't usually have those kinds of discussions in regular order, there are a couple of options here. One is a workshop within the meeting. Most of you are probably familiar with that. Another is a workshop before the decision-making discussion at a minimum. Another is a discussion under the rules of the Committee of the Whole. You can make a motion to invoke the Committee of the Whole, and that suspends the making of motions and the normal rules for a period of time, and whatever rules apply to your committee work are in place. So the broader point here is to look for ways to make space for flexible discussion, tentative discussion within your meeting. Next. So a few thoughts for how to do this, how to move a series of discussions from that initial point in the groan zone diagram through the groan zone to a consensus decision. There are four things to touch on here. Active listening, which by this time most of us have heard about at least. Expressing your own objectives clearly, using questions constructively, and reframing for inclusion. So let's go to active listening. So some of the things here are things that all of you do instinctively, perhaps. Being attentive, obviously, and letting the folks who are speaking, be they your colleagues or constituents or groups, see that you're being attentive. There is some validation in being heard, and people are more amenable to being flexible and thinking about other alternatives than their preferred alternative if it seems as if they're being treated respectfully and attentively, and you're really thinking about what they're saying. Seek to understand, not merely tolerate. It's probably, during that discussion, is not the time to amend your calendar or check email or anything else. Attend to the discussion, seek to understand, and seek to understand the interests behind what's being said. Listen for interests. Once others are done speaking, confirm your understanding. Check in and see, did you understand them correctly? Maybe try and paraphrase what they said was important to them. Reflect it back and seek confirmation, and acknowledge what you hear, whether you agree with it or not. Most people in public policy decisions, and certainly elected officials, think they have good reasons for the positions they take initially and the points they make, and whether or not you agree with them, acknowledging them can be very helpful. The other point to make before leaving this is that listening is the basis for everything that comes later. Without it, you really won't, without really actively listening, you really won't understand their interests. You won't understand what refinements might be needed to make this work. Listen past their positions for the interests. Next. Oh, well, here are some, I apologize, some phrases that can help you achieve what you're trying to achieve with active listening, and these are all formulations that I suspect you've heard or used. Well, help me understand your thinking on this. So encouraging them to talk to you, and then following up to about, if it wasn't clear from what they said, what is important to them about this, and again, confirming your understanding. So let's go to the next one. This is not the time to be, in quotes, strategic about what you tell them is important to you. If you want to make it easier for your colleagues and others to say yes to what you're proposing, it's helpful to be really clear about what's important to you. So as you tell them that, clarifying your assumptions, telling them, you know, well, we'll come to that in a moment, but clarifying your assumptions, explaining your interests in as tangible a way as possible, and adapting your message to the listener. Let's go to the next slide. So in terms of clarifying your assumption, I've been assuming that if we pursue this, X would happen. Is that your understanding? And maybe your assumption was wrong, and you can rethink part of what you're proposing as a result, or maybe you were right and the other person hasn't thought about it. Either way, making your assumptions clear. Being tangible about your interests, again, going back to the example we were using, at the end of the day, I'd like to see lots of people out there catching fish. I'd like to see at least as many visitors to the area as we get now, and a healthy recreational fishing industry. Whatever it might be, that puts it in terms that people can understand. And then adapting your message to the listener. Not everybody's going to really care about that, but you know, even again, pursuing the example, even if you don't fish, you benefit from the tourist dollars the industry brings. Next. Using questions constructively, explain why you're asking questions. When we have lots of questions, it can seem that we're engaged, or it can seem that we're objecting. Explain why you're asking the questions. I still don't understand this, X. Please help me understand. What is X? Asking questions about the interests and values behind the positions of others. Touched on it a couple of times. What's really important to you about this? It sounds like, from what you said, that it's this. Is that correct? It's helpful to use open-ended questions first before getting into really detailed, specific questions. So a question like, if we pursue this course of action, what kinds of outcomes would you anticipate? What do you think will happen? Then go into some of the details you may have questions about, but let them paint the picture for you and go from the broad to the specific. Next. I think we just covered these examples. So next. And then the last tool, reframing for greater inclusion or acceptance. I've been sort of really stressing the importance of trying to work with interests and values rather than positions, and doing it in a respectful way. So this is where you put all that together. It may be that all you really need to do is begin to talk about your proposal in a way, or your item in a way that reflects the interests you've heard from around your board or from the public. Or it may be that you need to reframe the item, not just the discussion, and refine it to reflect some of the interests you've heard. Either way, you're using the interests and values that you've learned about and that you've helped others learn from each other about to refine the discussion and or the item and shape a common understanding of the problem. So next. A couple of examples here. I won't read them, they just give you a sense of maybe a different set of words that address what we just saw on the previous slide. So again, three sets of ideas. The basic concepts, the notion that it's a process and that it's a process that requires a certain kind of exchange about values and interests and a certain kind of refinement to reflect those to reach consensus, and some specific tools to do that with. Final admonition, flexibility is essential here. Representative Jacobs alluded to it. Listen for different levels of agreement. Sometimes you've got agreement in principle and you can keep working out the details. That's a victory. That's a win. You've got a degree of consensus on something that you can build on. And the other two, I think we've talked about at length. Consider modifications to make the item more appealing or acceptable, and again, think about, as you have these discussions, do they need more information? Do they need more discussion? And I think with that, I will give it back to Representative Jacobs.
Thank you, Raphael. It's interesting to listen to so much great information and thinking to myself, boy, I wish I had talked to you when I was on the county commission, but then thinking, you know what, I can probably use this now as a member of the state legislature. So, so you know, let's talk a little bit about how all of these things come into play, right? So you've done everything the way it was supposed to be. You understood your colleagues, you listened carefully, you were flexible, you made every change you needed to do, you passed it unanimously across your board, and now it gets to the next city. They don't like the language. They want to change a word here or there. What if the next city over wants to change a word or a phrase or an action item that so substantially changes the item that your city is now going to back off? These are the realities of a compact, and they're one of the most important reasons why passing it amongst the elected officials of every city rather than just having stakeholders and task force and reports that go and sit on shelves. This is the difference between a compact that works and moves forward. And I want to share with you a story that happened in the compact, the Southeast Compact, that was begun. Now it's 8 years strong in place. It took a year, though, to pass that compact. And one of the reasons is you had 4 very large entities that were passing compact language, and each time it came before a county commission, someone changed a word, which meant that it had to go back through the process of those other boards that had already passed it, and it had to be readopted. And as we all know, every time something comes back before your board for approval, there's a chance that you don't win and that the item fails. This was a situation that happened where Monroe County had actually passed the compact 3 times, Palm Beach twice, and Broward County once when Miami-Dade wanted to make changes. The changes that Miami-Dade wanted to make were in the whereas clauses. They weren't the action clauses. They weren't the clauses that were ultimately important, but they were the kind of changes that would have caused everybody else to jump ship. And it also meant that each of those counties had to re-adopt the compact again. And not only that, they had to adopt it with language which we knew that they would not accept. And I won't go into the details of what that language was. Suffice to say, because it's going to be different with each of you and each of your compacts, depending on the topic. Suffice to say, though, that it became instantly clear to me that there are stakeholders out there that are threatened by this kind of unity. When you bring, as in our case, 109 cities representing and 4 counties representing 1/3 of the state's GDP, 1/3 of the state's population together to speak with one voice, the power of that can frighten some folks that are maybe not in it for the right reasons that we would all want them to be, and they start to throw out, I guess, little things that will trip you up. In that process, one of those was language change. So understanding that this can happen to you, understanding that it happened to us. On the day that this was going down, I sent my aide down to Miami-Dade, and this person ran through every single office and worked with them to make sure that they understood and pleaded with my colleagues, because luckily when you're talking to members who are from another city commission, the sunshine doesn't apply. So you can call them up and say, please support this item, vote for it one more time. Don't allow words to become weapons, because that's what special interests do. They throw out things that they know will kill the other side or support the other side, whichever one you're on. And what you want to do is not allow that to happen. And so stand back and understand that sometimes the bigger and most important thing is moving this project forward. And that means you may have to accept language that you don't like. It may mean that you have to support language you don't like before your board, so your board will pass it. Ultimately, the greater goal, and in my case, in our case, in South, to see that while it did take a year for all of these compacts to make it through all the daises, the truth is that we're 8 years down the road, and not only has it been adopted and endured over all these years, but recently all 4 counties and the 109 cities underneath them brought it back up for reconsideration, which is kind of a scary thing to bring up something that's been kind of part of our culture for the last 8 years, but to understand that there's a myriad number of new elected officials, both on the city and the county side. And if you want it to really survive and thrive going into the future, you want them all to put their stamp on it and let it go forward for a vote. That's what we did. It went through, we call it the version 2 of the Southeast Compact, and it moved, and it's still continuing to move forward today, getting stronger all the time. And the reason why all of this, the 8 years of progress and the amazing things that have happened from that first year to where we are today, is because we didn't allow the words to become weapons. We allowed ourselves to be flexible. We understood what these words meant and what they didn't mean, and we went forward. The last thing I want to leave with you is that even after you've laid it all to rest and you all have your clear picture about what's happening, make sure that you take a moment to go back and reiterate for your staff what their next steps are, what's expected of them, for your colleagues, what the mission is, what's expected of them, and that you've just kind of done an overview before it goes, so that there are no misconceptions about the compact and the obligations and the reasons why you think it's important, and in fact the reasons why your colleagues thought it was important the first time they voted for it unanimously, and now it's back. And I'm not saying it will be, but there is a possibility. And my last, I guess, one more thing to remind you all is that having done everything right, it can still all go wrong, and when it does, it's super okay. As long as you don't fall on that sword, as long as you lay yourself open to change, that you're flexible and understand the importance of the greater mission, that these words are not the drivers. It's you and the people around you and the people in the next jurisdictions and overall the cause for which you're fighting that are the most important, and it's worth getting beyond the words to make it happen. And so with that, Holly, I don't think I have much less left to add.
Thank you both so much. With that, we will open the floor for questions. And I have a few here that I'm showing. The first one I can answer is just asking about the slides and if we will be sharing the slides with everyone. So I just want to reiterate that on the handout section, you can download right now a PDF version of the slides. But as I said, they will be emailed to all participants and hosted on our website. The second question we have is, how do you build momentum and support among colleagues when we are restricted by sunshine?
So I think there was a comment that Raphael made earlier, and that was, to the degree to which you're able to bring these items before your board, either through workshops or through staff that's discussing them with your colleagues, it's really important that you do that. The more that they are familiar with the issue, the more that they're going to meetings and understanding what it is, the more that you share, and you can through your administration share news articles or memos or things from others that are interested in the issue, bringing those forward so that you know they're hearing the other take on it. The better off you're going to be. Sunshine definitely presents its problems, but it doesn't present a problem in reaching out to your other communities. So, for example, if there are 15 cities that are all in, there's a member, a champion in each one of those daises that is, they're moving this item forward in their own city and they're getting somewhere. There's nothing that prevents them from reaching out to your colleagues. So when you know if someone, and that's where the listening, having that sensitivity is really important. Understanding and knowing your colleagues. If you know that a colleague is going to have an issue, then bring someone who you know they're going to trust, that's perhaps from another city or even with a stakeholder within your own city. Let them get on the phone, let them go have a meeting, encourage that to happen to the degree that you can. And do it in the most magnanimous way that you can, understanding that you may be up to your eyebrows in information. You are a walking encyclopedia on the issue at hand and what the solutions are, but your colleague may not be. And so leaving that grace for them to come up to speed and understanding that, and I know we've all seen this happen, where we treat our colleagues or people that we serve with, treat others who don't believe the same way that they do as in fact they're stupid, or they'll say worse, that you just don't understand the issue. Because of course if you understand the issue, then you would know that I'm right. And I know I've served with people like that, and you probably do too. And it's very frustrating the idea is not to put them in a box. When you are, particularly in a public setting, to understand, let them understand that you're flexible, and let them come up to speed. Give them that grace to get to the same place that you are without feeling pressured into it.
Raphael, is there anything you'd like to add?
Actually, in the interests of saving time for other questions, what she said, that
Okay, the next question I have is, where can I find, oh, this is an easy one. Where can I find samples of compacts to learn more about the differences between whereas clauses and action items? So I'd like to actually respond to that one. On the Florida League of Cities website, there is a page devoted to the President's Initiative, the Florida Regional Compact Initiative. Under that, you will not only find resources and links directly to the Southeast Florida Climate Compact that Representative Jacobs spoke of, you will also find copies of 3 compacts that have passed around the state. We currently have 3 defined projects that are occurring and then a couple of other discussions. One is in the Swanee River Basin among several municipalities there coming together to address outdoor recreation as a form of economic development to boost tourism, and you'll see their compact that they have been working on to pass, and then are moving towards creating and holding a summit to engage all of their stakeholders. The second one is the Volusia Government's Water Resources Compact, and this is between all 16 of their municipalities and their county. And then the third one is the Indian River Lagoon Compact, which is a little bit different. They came together to specifically talk about the need to address from advocacy funding as well as kind of the scientific underpinnings of what needs to occur to clean up the lagoon and restore it. And they came together through the Space Coast League of Cities and the Treasure Coast Regional League of Cities as 2 joint kind of advocacy organizations signing a compact, and then they sought partners to sign on to their compact, and now their municipalities within Brevard County, Martin County, St. Lucie County, for Indian River, I forget Okeechobee, and there's one more, they're coming together and now taking that language as individual cities and passing a resolution in support of it. So you'll see and find on our website samples, or not samples, but templates that you can technically use to learn what others have are doing around the state and that have come before you.
And Holly, could I add, I'm not sure if we also have up on the web, the Southeast Compact was the inspiration between multiple compacts throughout the nation and actually outside the United States. So there is a similar compact language in Los Angeles, Boston, San Diego, Durban, South Africa, borrowed our same model and have the same structure, although not the same topics, but the same model that inspired all the work that the League is engaged in now. And if they're not there, we can have it up within the next, I will find it and make sure that those other examples, while outside of our state, may offer some other glimpses into how others have managed to pull broad areas together for consensus.
That would be great. Thank you. With that, I don't have any other questions, so we'll kind of do a going once, going twice. You can either raise your hand up, and then I'll know that you have one more question that you want to pose. I do see Joyce Bryan, Vice Mayor, from Margate. If you'd like to type in a question, I'll have our folks answer it. Maybe. I can try to unmute you. Vice Mayor Bryan?
Yes.
Hi, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead with your question.
Great. Thank all of you for this discussion. And Representative Jacobs, I'm in the same boat as you. I'm saying, wow, I wish I had this information before I started on the commission 2 years ago. It would have been helpful. I mean, in business school and other discussions, yes, you've learned parts of it, bits and pieces. But here, bringing it all together as one, it was so helpful. So thank both of you. I really commend you, and it was a great learning experience. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Aw, thank you. I'm glad.
Any other comments or questions? Okay. Well, with that, thank you all, and I just want to make a very quick pitch that if you want to learn more about the compact process, next Thursday at 2 p.m. we are actually going to be holding part 2 of our e-learning series called Sustaining Success. This is going to be talking a little bit about, okay, we passed the compact, then what? Several times during today's presentation, Representative Jacobs alluded to the need to have staff identified and prepared to take this charge up and move forward. Well, what does that look like? What are some of the kind of common, I'll say, speed bumps or landmines that folks do encounter so that we can learn from other people and not repeat the same mistakes as other folks have had, or just learn from them so we have a little bit smoother sailing. We'll hear from a representative from the Southeast Florida Climate Compact, as well as one of our local projects that is currently underway, as I mentioned, the Swanee River Basin. It's all about accessing resources and figuring out how to do that. So we hope that you will join us next week, Thursday, July 7th at 2 p.m. In the meantime, our website is up there as well as our office number, and you can always ask for me, Holly McPhail, and I will be glad to point you to the right resources. With that, thank you everyone, and see you next week.